Most people think they can't speak English confidently because they don't know enough English. But a few months ago, I realized something uncomfortable. That wasn't my problem, and it might not be yours either. Because if lack of knowledge was the problem, then every person who knows English grammar would speak confidently, but they don't. In fact, some of the most confident English speakers I know make grammar mistakes all the time, and some people who know every tense, every rule, every exception can barely speak in a conversation. So, what's actually going on? I realized the biggest obstacle wasn't English, it was fear, but not the kind of fear most people talk about. Let me explain. Think about how a child learns their first language. A child doesn't start with grammar. Nobody sits a 2-year-old down and explains present continuous tense. Nobody teaches subject, verb, object. Nobody gives them worksheets. Yet somehow, they learn to speak, not perfectly, but confidently. They say things wrong. They invent words. They make mistakes every day. And they keep talking. Because children have something adults lose, permission to be wrong. Now compare that to how most adults learn English. Before speaking a single sentence, they want to know if it's correct. Before answering a question, they start translating. Before opening their mouth, they're already judging themselves. And by the time they finish thinking, the conversation has moved on. I know this because I used to do it constantly. Someone would ask me a simple question. What did you do today? A normal conversation, but inside my head, a war would begin. Should I use present perfect or simple past? Is this sentence correct? What if I pronounce the word wrong? What if they laugh? What if I get stuck? And while I was thinking, someone else was already speaking. The strange thing is that I wasn't afraid of English. I was afraid of embarrassment. And there's a huge difference. Because embarrassment feels dangerous. Your brain treats social rejection almost like physical danger. Thousands of years ago, being rejected by your tribe could literally threaten your survival. So even today, your brain hates situations where you might look foolish. That's why speaking English feels harder than studying English. Studying is private, speaking is public. Studying has no risk, speaking has consequences. At least that's what your brain believes. But then I noticed something interesting. Every confident English speaker I met had one thing in common. They weren't speaking because they knew English. They knew English because they had spent years speaking. Read that again. Most people think confidence comes first, then speaking. Reality works in the opposite direction. Speaking comes first, then confidence. Nobody learns to swim by reading about swimming. Nobody learns to ride a bicycle by watching videos. And nobody becomes a confident speaker by waiting until they're ready, because ready never comes. There is always another grammar rule, another vocabulary list, another pronunciation video, another course, another excuse, and that's exactly what happened to me. For a long time, I thought I was preparing, but I wasn't preparing. I was hiding. Learning felt productive, but learning was also safe. As long as I kept studying, I never had to risk making mistakes. Then one day I asked myself a simple question. What if confidence is not something you gain before action? What if confidence is something action creates? That changed everything. Because suddenly the goal wasn't speaking perfect English. The goal was surviving imperfect conversations. And once I changed that goal, something surprising happened. I started improving faster. Not because my grammar suddenly became perfect, not because I learned thousands of new words, but because I finally started collecting evidence. Evidence that I could survive mistakes, evidence that people still understood me, evidence that nobody cared about my errors as much as I did. Every conversation became proof, and slowly the fear started shrinking. Not disappearing, shrinking. That's an important distinction. Confident people are not fearless. They've just learned that mistakes are survivable. And the more I looked around, the more obvious this became. Have you ever noticed that people with broken English still travel the world? They make friends. They build businesses. They negotiate deals. They fall in love. They tell stories. Their English isn't perfect, but their communication works. Meanwhile, some learners spend years waiting for perfection and never speak at all. One group has imperfect English and real conversations. The other has perfect notes and silent mouths. Which one improves faster? The answer is obvious, and that's when I realized the truth. My problem was never English. My problem was expecting myself to be perfect before I allowed myself to speak. But language doesn't reward perfection. Language rewards participation. Every fluent speaker you admire has a history of awkward conversations, mispronounced words, embarrassing mistakes, moments they wanted to disappear. You just never saw that part. You only see the final result, not the thousands of imperfect attempts that created it. So if you're someone who understands English, if you can read English, if you can watch videos in English, but you still struggle to speak confidently, maybe the issue isn't your knowledge. Maybe you're waiting for a level of certainty that doesn't exist. Because confidence isn't the reward at the end of the journey. Confidence is the result of walking the path despite uncertainty. And the day I understood that, English stopped feeling like an exam and started feeling like a conversation I was finally willing to join.